Sometimes people wonder what inspires a designer. Now, the creative process really begins when you make connections between things that are apparently unrelated. And when I think about inspiration, I can't say this for other designers, but it's really nothing so special. It's really just the everyday humdrum of my daily life. Now, me being an American and living and working in China, my everyday life can be sometimes pretty strange or bizarre. Now, when we were thinking about locating ourselves in the center of the everyday, we decided to position ourselves in the center of China, in the middle of Beijing, within the original walls of the forbidden city, in a traditional Chinese courtyard house. Now, our neighborhoods are neighborhoods that are very historic, and these neighborhoods are characterized by these brick-lined alleys called hutongs. And these hutongs are teeming with life. So if you were to come to our office and look outside our door, it would be surprising to see, say, a barber cutting hair on the street, or the army marching by, or a photo shoot going on, or even us strange architects building some funny gold structure out of reflective panels. What do you see when you look outside your office door? Now, the interesting thing about this is that all these things could be happening all at the same time, in the same place, and maybe even on a daily basis. And for me, this is really the stuff that makes our neighborhood unique. And together, these relationships between these people that you would not expect to be related to another, these are relationships that are happening all around the neighborhood. And together, they really form a kind of a collective whole, a whole that makes our neighborhoods unique. Now, what does this have to do with architecture? Well, is there something about these two tones that have something to do with providing for this type of diversity? Is there something about the spatial makeup that is making this happen? And this is potentially a very inspiring idea for us architects, because that means that the spaces that we live in, that we find very, very intriguing and exciting, are directly related with the things that I do. So something happening in my head can potentially in the future be part of our built environment and be affecting society. Now, before I talk too much about buildings, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the relationships between people in Chinese society. Historically in China, there's an idea of the danyuan. And the danyuan is something that is considered a basic social unit. Now, the danyuan really embodies the idea of a collective as opposed to the individual. The individual is often really a mask. We look here, we're looking at, Justin Bieber, and he really exudes individuality. But in fact, he's really the result of a massive collective effort. Instead, if we look at this boy band, they're not so different from one another, but they're definitely not exuding individuality. In any case, there's no reason why we shouldn't be celebrating the collective. And coming back to the idea of the danyuan in English means family unit. It is one primary unit of your family, and these units are what the entire society is made up of. These units consist of a strict social hierarchy. You have the father at the top, the head of the household, then you have the mother and the son and the daughter and so on. And these relationships are multiplied and copied and scaled so that they encompass the whole nation. The interesting thing is also that these social units, these danyuans, have a very direct architectural equivalent, and that is the traditional Chinese courtyard house, or 四合院. 四 means four, 合 means together, yuan means courtyard. And these 四合院 are also made of units. They are 4 parts, rooms that correlate with an individual family member, and the position of the rooms correlate with your rank within the family. And these courtyards are the result of these four pieces, these four identical pieces put together surrounding a central space, and this central space is where the family spends their time together. This is where they connect with each other. These courtyards are then copied and replicated and arranged in a way so that the leftover spaces are the hutong that I was talking about before. And these hutongs are where neighbors connect with each other and form relationships. This is where people spend their public life. And these neighborhoods then are scaled to encompass the cities in China. The Forbidden City is also built in a similar way. The Forbidden City is also courtyards that are replicated and copied and arranged in a way that it not only reflects the social structure of Chinese society, but it also reflects the structure of the political organization. It is the structure of the state. And this comes with all of the hierarchies that we're mentioning about in the family, scaled up to a massive scale. Now for us, these social hierarchies are obviously not relevant in our daily work today. But this idea of these blocks that are replicated and copied and organized in a way that reflects certain social values, this is something that we can use as architects as a design tool. Here we have a building that we designed in Shanxi, Taiyuan. It's called the River Heights project. And this project uses these blocks that I've been mentioning. So like a courtyard house that is made up of blocks, our building is also individual blocks that are replicated, copied, and arranged, but they're not arranged with any relationship with a social hierarchy. But rather, each block contains a certain function. This function includes a cafe and a gallery and a lounge. And together, these spaces create a very diverse and rich environment that allows for all kinds of activities to be happening all at once in the same place at the same time. So you can be looking down these blocks, and the transparency between these discrete individual spaces allow you to connect all throughout. So, for example, you could be looking in the front door of this building and be looking through a group of people that are busy listening to a performance, and seeing a couple of people in the outdoor garden area in the middle of the building, kind of lounging out. If you were to look up someone, I'd be waving to you who's kind of bored at a party going on the roof deck, while behind him there's even more bored people that are busy chasing a deadline, working at the desk in the office space. This kind of environment we feel is reflective of the urban environment that we value in the hutongs that surround us. You have spaces where you can stand outside, looking inside, looking outside, and looking inside. The diversity of these spaces do not overcome the unified whole of this building. We really see this as another form of the collective. And we hope that in the future, buildings will include more and more of this type of urban diversity, not only around the buildings, but also within the buildings themselves. Now, I've talked about the relationship between people and space within the context of the individual and the collective. But I'd also like to use the same framework to talk about the relationship between people and land. Now, if you're thinking of land as an individual, you think of land as something that is private property. Right? I own this piece of land, this is mine. If you think of it from a collective point of view, you think of land as something that is shared by everyone. So from an architectural standpoint or an urban standpoint, that would be equivalent to say, I have a single-family home in the suburbs of Los Angeles. This is something that I bought, this is my land. As opposed to a public square in the center of a city. For example, in Beijing, we have one of the largest ones in the world. In fact, this idea of not being able to own private property, this is a basic socialist concept. It is one of the main tenets of Marxism. And Karl Marx thought of this because he was concerned about social inequality, and he thought if he could find a solution for getting rid of the landowning class, then maybe he could solve the social inequality problem. So if you get rid of the ability to own land, you would not have the landowning class, and therefore you would not have social inequality. But to put this in a different way, if we were to look at it from today's point of view, if we were to distribute land evenly amongst all the inhabitants of the earth, you'd be left with about 10 square meters for each person to use. That's about 100 square feet per person. To help us relate to this, 10 square meters is around the size of a prison cell for a couple of inmates. And this doesn't include infrastructural things such as streets or hospitals or schools or reservoirs and so on. So imagine that if that was your building block, if that was your social unit. Now, if we connect back to the idea of a danyuan, in Mao's era, the danyuan was transformed into the work unit. He got rid of this whole idea that an individual was connected to your family. The individual was instead, during his era, connected to the danyuan, or the work unit. And the work unit also had its architectural equivalent. It was also called the danyuan. And this was really something that existed as sort of a large commune. So it provided a person with everything that they needed, because this was the extent of your world. You would have your workplace, the factories, the offices, and public facilities such as schools and hospitals, and you would also have housing. Everyone was provided free housing. And the interesting thing is, if your danyuan was to move, then everyone would move with it. There was no connection between these people and a particular piece of land. In Mao's era, as it is today in China, there is no private ownership of land. But today, things are a little bit different. You don't have these danyuans anymore, you don't have danyuans anymore. You are able to own private property, but you're still not able to own land, so these two things, when they're mixed together, they don't fit so well. And you get situations like this, which we call nail houses. And nail houses, the meaning of that is that they've been anchored to a piece of land. And if this piece of land was being dug up, and you're on this piece of land, then you're going to be sort of dug up with it. It's just sort of a matter of time. But if we were to take this idea of not being able to own land, and that land should be something that belongs to everyone, perhaps we can consider an alternative to being so closely locked in with our place in the city. Maybe it's something to consider that our houses can be mobile, because there's no problem with allowing people to own property. The problem is that property isn't able to move. Now, we do have an equivalent in Western culture. You have the mobile home, but this probably worked very well in your urban Chinese center. And looking in China for inspiration, well, this is literally something that I took a picture of while I was on my way to work. You see that the same concept does exist here. And within this picture, looking at it more closely, there's an idea of, hey, well, what if we combine the tricycle with the house? Now, tricycles in China are extremely pervasive. I would say it's something that is very much a part of your everyday life in China. And these tricycles are amazing. They're used in all kinds of ways, and people are extremely inventive. They'll sleep in them, they'll lounge in them, they work in them. So we designed our tricycle, and our tricycle house also exists as a self-contained social unit. It's something that provides for all the private needs of an individual. You can open up the back like an accordion or a folding fan, and you would see that you have furniture that can transform into a table, into a bed, into a bookshelf on the wall. There's a sink, there's a stove, as well as a bathtub that collapses and expands from the wall. There's a whole other way of living For example, you can be stuck in traffic commuting on your way to work and not feel rushed because you can be taking a bath slowly. And you can take advantage of a lot of infrastructural services that are provided for you that are free. So for example, you can park your tricycle at an empty parking lot at night when it's unused. You're not wasting that space. There's plenty of public facilities such as toilets, because in the hutongs you don't have toilets anyway, you don't have your own toilets anyway, and you can connect with neighbors around you. You can also park your tricycle underneath street lamps to take advantage of the lighting around you. And because the tricycle is translucent, you don't need any electricity for lighting inside. Now, the tricycle is also a social building block because you can also expand them out in a kind of an origami way to connect with other tricycles. You can create all kinds of relationships with people around you. You can build up communities, or maybe you have a big family. In any case, this is something that is along the lines of the Maoist danwei, where the danwei provided for all of your daily needs. In this case, your city really provides for a lot of your daily needs. There's only a few things that you really need to keep private, such as taking baths. In conclusion, I'd like to emphasize that it's really worth considering this idea of the collective. That the idea of the individual is perhaps something a lot more superficial than we would usually want to admit. And that this collective way of living is really something that adds to a lot of the richness that we really find valuable in the cities that we live in. In addition, the idea that we are just one piece out of a greater whole is something that can be extended to our land and all the resources that we have around us. And accepting this mobile idea of life is something that is actually not so far from our current reality. In fact, so many of us are living in a nomadic way, such as when we're eating in our car or sleeping on airplanes, that this idea of being locked down to a piece of land is not necessarily something that we really need to hold on to so strongly. And finally, as an architect, I like to emphasize that what we do can have something that has a direct relationship with society. That we're not here just to make things look pretty. We're not here only to make things more comfortable. But we're really here to think of the way that things will be. Everything that we do doesn't exist yet. We're projecting into the future. And the things that we project into the future will be a part of our built environment. So whether or not we like it or not, these things are going to affect everyone. And hopefully we build them in ways that are beneficial for all of us. Thank you.